Our house in the middle of an HOA. We had just moved into our new house, a 1.5-story white farmhouse with no farm, when I found my first bullet. My mother called it 1.5 stories because only a little bit of it stuck above the rest. It had been a tiny pioneer farmhouse way, way back, and the previous owners had put a huge 1-story addition onto the side of it. It relegated the first floor of the original house to little more than an entrance hall. There was a closet that had been converted into a half bath, and a narrow flight of stairs leading to 2 upstairs rooms. The kitchen occupied part of the old house and had a counter where the side of the house used to be. It opened up into a huge grand room with a dining table, couches, and a big TV. There was a pool table, and the master bedroom was in the addition too, because the previous owners couldn't use the stairs anymore. The outside was covered in vinyl siding that was supposed to tie it all together. It didn't work, and the best anyone was ever able to say about it was, "You can't tell it's not wood." The result was an awkward-looking house that seemed jammed together on the inside and incongruous on the outside. It looked like an ungainly 1-story house with a partial upstairs, hence the name, which my mother found pretty because it was so fitting. It was a farmhouse with no farm because it used to be a farm, but now it was just a 3-acre plot of land with a separate barn, good in theory for a few dairy cows, and a crumbling tennis court that the previous owners had installed around when they put on the addition. Those were the days when they thought they could finally live in their dream house. They probably should have moved. What was left of the old farm was a housing development with, frankly, bigger, better houses. They were all variations on the same design, some mirror images, some fitted out with special features, but all matching each other somehow. They were part of an HOA, and we caught wind of the disputes that arose sometimes over how the lawn was cut or what kind of flags could be flown. Our property kind of jutted into the development. Part of the road went right past the edge of the back of our property, and neighbors would look longingly at us as they drove past. At first, we thought they were contemptuous of our house, and in a way they were. It would look more uniform if our lot consisted of 2 more of their houses, and they, like us, were of the opinion that the previous owners should have sold their property. However, really they were jealous of us because we were exempt from the HOA rules, and that was rubbed in their faces every time they drove past. Our house, in its deranged clumsiness, represented freedom. Why had we moved? That was hard to say. I didn't know what my dad did for a living. My parents just said we were going to move and had us, my older brother Jack and my more older sister Genevieve, quote-unquote, help find a new house. We toured a few of them, but of course the decision was a foregone conclusion. They took us to a few really run-down places first, to make this one more attractive. And they had something special for each of us to win us over individually. In my case, they tricked me by putting a Reese's peanut butter cup on a special inset shelf next to where my bed would be. They told my brother his room across the hall was slightly bigger. My sister, the least excited about moving, was propitiated with another addition just for her. They just kind of stuck it onto the back of the house like the first addition. It shared a wall with the master bedroom, and the roof had to be angled toward the roof of the other part of the first floor to channel water away, creating a makeshift butterfly roof that added yet another convulsion to the overall house plan. My sister loved it, though, because on the inside, the upper half of the wall was glass, and she had her own bathroom. They once were lost. The bullet was in the backyard behind the barn. I took my matchbox cars and a trowel out there one day to make tracks for them. There was a small hillock near the edge of the property, shaded by trees, and I started digging to make little garages and roads all along it. And one of the shovelfuls of dirt turned up a bullet. I was a little afraid of it because I had never seen one before. I didn't know if it would go off, but I gathered my courage, picked it up, and wiped it off. It was very small and rounded, I know now that it was a .22 caliber, and I was fascinated by the tiny dents in the lead. I wondered if the lead would poison me. I had no idea what I would do with it, but I felt I should hide it. If I showed it to my mom, she would take it, and I would never see it again. So I put it in my pocket, went back inside, and went to my room, where I hid it in a sock in my top drawer. Then I thought better of that and put it in a little glass that had paper clips in it, put that on my inset shelf, and then put books in front of the glass. Next, I went back out and started digging all over, looking for more bullets. I found a lot of empty shells, which I collected in my pocket, and eventually 2 more bullets. Happy with that much of a take, I went back in and hid the 2 bullets with the other one and put the shell casings in a sock. My mother made me take a bath and I couldn't look at them properly until after bedtime, but I laid them out on my bed next to each other and wondered where they could have come from. I had half a revolver right there. I lined the casings up on my shelf like soldiers and noticed how light they were and how easily they fell over. I wondered why there were so many out there. Could have been a rifle range, I reasoned, or perhaps it was just the accumulation of years of shooting. There could be bullets all over the farm. I imagined an old guy with a straw hat on shooting at squirrels and birds as he sat on a rocking chair and drank moonshine. My lovely brother Jack. I was curious enough that I went to ask Jack, not about the rounds, just the casings. That was a big step to take, actually. My brother Jack was not the nurturing, best friend type of brother. He was always tricking me about things, and at that age, I was always believing him. And he had a way of torpedoing my good mood for no apparent reason. For example, when we had first moved in, I felt lucky to have the room with the inset shelf. Jack's didn't, and until we had all the furniture in place, I was nervous that could change. So I went to him in his room, which had his bed set up by then. That was the first thing we did. And said he had a really cool room. He was reading a comic book, but he looked over the top of it and said, "Why?" I didn't expect a challenge. "It's just big, that's all." "They're exactly the same," he said. "Mine has that little shelf." He shrugged. "Okay, if that's what you like." He widened his eyes as he said that, as if he couldn't believe how stupid I was, and went back to reading. "What's wrong with the shelf?" "Nothing. If you like it, that's great. It's just I wouldn't want it." "Why not?" "'Cause." "What's wrong with an inset shelf?" "Nothing." I said, "If it makes you happy, knock yourself out." You might imagine that had me wondering what was wrong with it for days, or whether there was something else about his room that was so great that I couldn't see. So when he wasn't around, I paced out the sizes, compared the windows, looked at the walls, where the light sockets were, how big the closets were, and everything else I could think of, and couldn't find anything different about the rooms other than that shelf, and that his room really was slightly bigger, which, by the way, proved he was wrong about how they were exactly the same, even though he already should have known that because that's what our parents had said. It was too complicated to untie all that. I was always getting confused with him. I couldn't tell him it was bigger, though, or he'd know I had been in his room. A few days later, he put a poster up next to his bed and said, "See that? You can't do that next to your bed because you have that shelf." So then I tried to put a poster up, but I couldn't because even if I covered the shelf, the roof slanted in such a way that it pushed the poster down and to the right, so some of the shelf would be visible. I cut the upper left corner of the poster off and covered the shelf. When my brother saw that, he said, "That's so dumb. You covered up your shelf and you ruined your poster. What's wrong with you?" By then, I was too stubborn to change it, but in the end, I was jumping on my bed and my hand went through the poster and I had to take it down. So you see that nothing was easy with him. I went to his door, which was open, and he was reading a comic book again. A graphic novel, I should say. "Jack, what's wrong now?" "Nothing." "Then why are you here?" "Look at this." I went over to him and put a shell casing in his hand. "Whoa, where did this come from?" The backyard? Is this the only one? No, there were lots. Let me see. We went to my room and I showed him the sock. He took it back to his room and I followed. Wow, he said, you're in trouble. Why? I just found them. It's illegal to have shell casings, especially here. Didn't you hear about the murders? What murders? The previous owners. They killed their children in the backyard. That's evidence on top of being illegal. The police will put you in juvenile detention and send you to Texas. At that age, I thought Texas was just all cattle and mean people with horses and big cars. I also knew they had the death penalty. Really? I said. Yes, really. And they don't like kids from Virginia. They still hate us from the Civil War. I didn't know that made no sense. He added details like that just to enhance his amusement. You won't tell, will you? I don't know. Are you going to make my bed? Do you know the pit you get in your stomach when you wish you could replay your life for a few seconds? Give it back. Only if you make my bed for a week. Fine, I said. He gave me back the single shell casing and put the sock with all the others in his drawer. Now go back to your room. I did, and I felt used and abused, to say the least. In my anger, I thought about things I could do with the real bullets. But that was out of the question. I couldn't do that to my brother, no matter what he did. God would know. I gathered another 3 bullets and about a dozen casings the next day, and I was wiping a 4th when my brother appeared behind me. I could feel his presence. Wow, I said, trying to pretend I was so amazed that I spoke out loud. Look what I found. Don't lie, Brian. I've been standing here for like half an hour. I knew that amount of time couldn't be true, but it changed nothing. Do you have any more? No, just these 2. Hold on, he said. He went into the barn and got a shovel. He planted it down at the base of my little town, gave it a shove with his foot, and uprooted one whole neighborhood at a blow. Stop! Come on, help me look. He dug his hands into the dirt and turned up several more casings. He stood up and dug into the mound again. Why don't you dig over there, I said. I have a feeling about this place right here. That shovel might make one of them shoot off. So what? The dirt'll stop it. He turned over more of the dirt. Okay, he said. I shovel, you shift. You sift. I started going through the earth with my hands, and after a while, we had found a lot more casings and 1 more bullet. I wonder why they were so careless, he said. Do you have any more in your room? No, I bet you do. They're all over the place. He put the shovel down and went toward the house. Stop, it's my room. So you do have some. He kept going, and he went right upstairs to my bureau. There were more casings in there, but no bullets. He looked through my closet, inside my jackets and shoes. He checked under the bed and went between the mattresses. Then he looked in my inset shelf and, amazingly, missed the bullets in the glass completely. Even I could see some of them amongst the paper clips from where I was standing, and I have to say that the books stacked up around the glass were a dead giveaway. Are you sure you don't have any more? Definitely. You have them all. I only want them because they're dangerous. They can go off any time. No, they won't. You do have more, don't you? You said they won't. That means you have some. And they can go off. All they need is a tiny little tap. And if one goes off, they all go off. In my anxiety, I couldn't help looking at the glass on my shelf, and Jack followed my eyes. He jumped on the bed and took a closer look. Here we go, he said, picking up the glass. That's clever, but not clever enough. He dumped the contents of the glass out, picked out the bullets, and went to his room, closing the door. All I could do was clean up the paper clips. Couldn't exactly tell my parents. I lay down on my bed, angry, and thought. He had the upper hand on me, and there was nothing I could do about it. But desperation brought me to a last-ditch plan. I would talk to Genevieve. There's no place like Genevieve's room. I quietly tapped on her door and got no response. She was probably listening to music, so I tapped a little harder. Finally, the door opened a crack. Can I talk to you? Sure, Bibi. She opened up and said, You're filthy. You can't come in here like that. Hold on. Take off your shoes. She closed the door, and I took off my shoes. She opened the door again and wrapped me in a blanket, then picked me up and carried me over to her soft chair. She sat on the ground in front of me. "So what's up?" "It's Jack." "Ugh," she said. "What's he doing now?" "He takes my stuff and he makes me make his bed." "That makes no sense. Why do you make his bed?" "Well, the stuff isn't exactly legal." "What do you mean not legal?" She didn't seem concerned, just skeptical. "It's bullets that were used in the murders. Some of them, anyway." "What murders? Didn't you know?" "The previous owners killed the children in the backyard." "Baby, Jack has you in some kind of trance. He's got you all tied up. There were no murders. Just tell me what happened." She got the straight story out of me. The nice thing about Genevieve was that she never made me feel embarrassed. I mean, sometimes she did, like the time she and her girlfriend made me put on her dresses and makeup and took pictures of me. But that was a separate issue and was a long time before. She never made me feel stupid, would be a better way to put it. "Sometime you're going to have to say no to him." I shook my head vigorously. "Well, if you won't do that, you'll be his whipping boy forever. He'll beat me up." "He won't beat you up. He just makes you think he will. Do you know what kind of trouble he'd be in if he did that?" "He always gets to me somehow." "All right, how about this? A little malicious compliance mixed in with outright rebellion." I nodded, although I did not know what malicious compliance meant. "It's an old trick. You short sheet his bed." "Short sheet?" "Yes. You make his bed and do it with a smile. But you use the top sheet for the bottom sheet and fold it up so it looks like it's made, but when you try to stick your feet in, they get jammed." She could tell I wasn't getting it. Spatial reasoning wasn't my strong suit at the time. "I'll show you. Come here. Keep the blanket around you." She tore the sheets off her bed and started to show me. "Actually, you better do it or you'll forget. Come to the bathroom." She took the blanket off, wet a towel, and wiped away the worst of the dirt and mud that I had on my clothes. Then she washed my face and hands in the sink with a washcloth. That made me feel like I was 4 years old, but I let her do it anyway. "Okay," she said, and she showed me how to short sheet the bed. "You really think I should?" I said. "You have to fight back somehow." I wasn't sure, but I was feeling a little more confident and rebellious after that conversation. And the next morning I did as she had shown me. All day I thought about it. He was sitting right on top of my trap for a good while reading his graphic novels. During the day, I went out and did a little more digging, and boy, did I find something good then. Jack had apparently lost interest and didn't follow me. As I dug, I found the usual catch of casings and old bullets, although the yield was lessening. They were concentrated in that one area. They must have done a lot of target practice from there. What I found was another bullet way bigger than the rest. It looked a lot like the others, but the casing was longer and the bullet was stumpier and had 2 colors, one goldish and the other lead. Also, the top was flatter and had a kind of bowl in it. It was about 1.5 inches long altogether. This was for no ordinary gun. I put it in my pocket and then hid it far under my mattress, under the assumption that if my brother conducted another search, he wouldn't go to the same place twice. Dinner came and went, then bedtime. My brother and I brushed our teeth at the same time. I said as little as possible, afraid I'd give myself away somehow. Then I went to bed, and so did he. I heard nothing, so I snuck over, and through the keyhole, I could see he was still reading. I went back to bed and waited. After a half hour or so, I heard him yell, "What's this?" His feet stomped across the hall, and he threw open my door. "What did you do that for?" The sudden noise alerted my mother, who came up the stairs in a flash. "What is it?" "He short-sheeted my bed." "Short-sheeted your bed?" She turned to me. "What's going on?" I didn't have a real defense. I couldn't tell her Jack was forcing me to make his bed without telling her why, so I had to take it on the chin as me doing a gratuitous prank on him, and I got the punishment. I was going to have to make his bed for him for a week starting then. My brother smiled with glee at that, making sure to change his expression to shock and horror if she looked at him. And there I was, back to square one. But it was worth it. For once, I had gotten the better of him, and over the next days, it didn't save him any time. He supervised me closely as I made the bed, which admittedly gave him some satisfaction. But the fact that he also had to check at night made him realize that he was not truly safe anywhere. The balance of power had tipped ever so slightly in my favor. The good old days. My dad had always been proud of having grown up on a farm, and he spoke of it often. It was hard work, but he looked back on those days with great fondness. He had to help his dad with the baler and the tractor and the plow. They mainly grew corn, watermelons, and pumpkins. Pumpkins were, believe it or not, a cash crop for them because they sold a goodly number of them around Halloween. They had a few dairy cows and chickens and even some pigs, but that was mostly a remnant of when it had been a well-balanced farm many years before. There was no real money in it, certainly not in livestock. They only kept them because, according to my grandfather, a real farm had cows, chickens, and pigs. The truth is, it had become partially a gentleman's farm over the years, and by that I mean my grandfather had a hardware store where he made his real money, and the farm was there for sentimental reasons. The chickens were the worst, according to my father. They could all die overnight from some plague, and keeping their area clean was a constant problem. And there was more than one day he had to clean up the mass murder of some fox or fisher cat that got into the coop. My mom and dad had started the family in town, and it was only in the previous few years that it had dawned on him that he might be able to live on a farm that had everything but the fields and the hard work, which was the genesis of the idea of purchasing our little empire. Certain chores, however, he still reveled in. Chainsawing was one, splitting wood was another, and having a bonfire was perhaps his favorite. So late that summer, he got a permit to burn, and we gathered all the brush and yard waste together to set it alight. This being the first bonfire for us kids, we didn't quite know what to expect, but our dad's enthusiasm did not disappoint. He started by dousing our pile of debris with a plastic fluff jar's worth of gasoline, and the subsequent mushroom cloud made us cheer with awe and delight, even as we raised our hands to shield our faces from the sudden blast of radiant heat. The fire died down and was very smoky because of the damp grass cuttings, but when it went down too far, our dad would be prepared with another jar of gas. He warned us to stay out of the smoke, lest there be burning poison ivy, which would attack our faces without mercy, and we dragged additional branches, small boards, and anything flammable we could find that passed our parents' approval. Eventually, the bonfire was self-sustaining, and we stared at the hypnotic red embers as they slowly devoured the last of the large pieces of wood. There were some cans that had found their way in somehow, and we were fascinated at how they disappeared in the heat. Dad explained that aluminum was flammable, and in fact that powdered aluminum was the main fuel in solid rocket boosters that used to take the space shuttle to orbit. The idea that we drank Coke out of rocket fuel intrigued us. Do I feel lucky? Alas, these hours of pleasure finally came to an end, and the fire was burning itself out. Genevieve had somewhere to go, so my dad needed a driver there, and it so happened that my mother had already gone into town on some errand. So Dad got the hose and handed it to Jack with the instruction to keep watering it until it stopped smoking, and then water it some more. That may have been a mistake. Because the moment our father's car went out of sight, Jack threw the hose aside and ran inside. A short time later, he came out with the bullets he had stolen from me, and finding a spot where the embers were still red, he threw several of them in. "Are you crazy?" I shouted. "Don't worry," he said. "They'll just blow up. They aren't a gun." "What are you talking about? They're bullets." My brother seemed to lose confidence and backed up. "We just have to stand back," he said. I went and hid behind the barn door. Jack stood apprehensively about 30 yards away. After a few minutes, there was a crack. We looked at each other with excitement, and we saw no sign of a bullet flying off or hitting anything. Perhaps Jack was right. Then there was another crack, and then 2 more. "See," he said. "That was cool." He approached the fire again and threw in another handful. "Are you sure they all went off?" I said. "Yeah, I threw in 4. We waited again, and then there was a series of cracks all at once. "Hold on," said my brother. I couldn't tell how many went off. Nothing happened for a while, so we threw the last of the bullets in, and there was another crackling like fireworks. By then, we were standing pretty close to the flames. "See, they don't have anything to push against," said Jack, "so they don't shoot. They just blow up like firecrackers. Do you have any more?" "No. Come on, really. I won't be mad." "I guess I have a couple more." It was true. In addition to the big bullet, I had found several more, and they were all under my mattress. "I'll be right back." I went to my room and reached under for the bullets. 6 bullets, as I had thought. But then I thought about the big one. Should I tell Jack? I grabbed it and put it in my back pocket. I went down and gave the rest to Jack. He threw them in and backed off. As he turned, I quickly threw the big one in. I ran behind the barn door. "Why are you so nervous all of a sudden?" said Jack. "I'm not nervous," I said. I stepped out toward the fire. There was another crackle. "Wait," said Jack. I couldn't hear how many again. We waited. Nothing happened. "All right, I guess that's all," he said. "Unless you still have some more." "Nope, but I think we should wait a little. You had 6, and I only heard 5 cracks." "I think I heard 6, he said. He was right. There had been 6, but the last big one was still in there. "I only heard 5. "All right, fine," he said. We waited a minute longer. "There's nothing else in there. It was definitely 6. "I don't know," I said. "You better not take your chances." "Whatever," he said. "I feel lucky." He went over to the house, bent over to pick it up, and boom, the big bullet went off. My brother started screaming, and he grabbed his butt. He turned, trying to look at it. I could see blood coming through his pants. "Oh, damn," I said. "There's blood." Apparently, the pain suddenly got worse because Jack fell to the ground, holding his rear end. All he did was scream. "Get up," I said. "We got to get you inside. We got to call an ambulance." I helped him up, and he was able to limp in. I got him a towel, and he lay down on the ground. Right then, my mother pulled in, and I ran out to get her. Long story short, she took him to the hospital, and he had a piece of shrapnel from the big bullet's casing in his buttock. All he needed was for it to be extracted and to get a few stitches. He had a lot of trouble sitting for a couple of days, but otherwise he was fine. The good thing was that Jack was the one who got in trouble. He was the older one and should not have allowed that to happen. He got grounded for a long time, or something like that. The main thing is that he got blamed, and this time I got to laugh with glee every time Mom or Dad turned around. We found out the caliber of the bullets. The smaller ones were .22s, as I mentioned, which are deadly and nothing to be trifled with. But the big one was from a .44 Magnum. My brother was right. Bullets don't shoot from a fire the way they do with guns, but they can explode. He was actually lucky he got off that easy. And there is one other thing about this. My father was brought back to his younger days by that bonfire, and in a way, the incident with the bullets did too. His family had always had guns on the farm. He and my mom had gotten rid of them when they moved into the suburbs, mainly because my mom didn't want them. But now, it's hard to describe, but they were teetering back and forth between 2 things. Tell us guns were evil and we should never touch them, or teach us how to use them. My dad was mostly in favor of the latter. If we'd had any sense at all, we never would have thrown bullets in the fire, and the best way to get some sense about guns was to learn about them. This time, he won. Actually, I shouldn't say that, because my mom also changed her mind. We didn't have guns on the property. We had always been told to stay away from them, and yet we still had an accident. So, I don't know the full depth and breadth of their discussions, but we started going to a gun range. My dad said it was a shame that the rest of the farm had gotten sold, because that place where I had found the bullets would have been a perfect place to target practice. You could still see a small hill on the edge of the property where they must have put the targets, but that was out of the question with the HOA right next door. So finally, and this is the final thing, promise, we moved after 3 years and bought a real farm where we could shoot and hunt. Our farmhouse got bought by the HOA and torn down, so if I went back there now, it would be just another 2 houses along the road. And we were back on a gentleman's farm. It wasn't making any money, but it was there, and it was ours. And I guess it would help us in case of the apocalypse. And after that, this is the last one. I was no longer my brother's whipping boy. I can't say exactly why. There's nothing directly logical about it, but we somehow ended up on about the same level. I guess everybody got what they wanted in the end.